Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Forum. My name's Garrett Sauls. I work for a data consulting firm called Interworks. We're in the US, UK, Germany, Australia, but I am decidedly not one of the consultants. I work on the marketing team. I'm a content manager, and I always joke that I'm a corporate English teacher, but my tie to enablement is largely through Annabelle and largely through getting our consultants, getting very smart data people to share their thoughts with the outside world, whether it's on a blog, whether it's on a webinar. So I try to get people to talk and facilitate discussion, and that's exactly why we're here. So I'll pitch it over to Annabelle to introduce herself, and then she'll introduce our lovely guest.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. A warm welcome also from my side. My name is Annabelle Lincoln. I am tuning in from Switzerland. I am available for hire. I should say that. Anyway, I'm passionate about data visualization and also enablement. And I think it's our 11th episode that we have, Garrett, with this data forum about enablement, because it's something that we consider that is missing in a lot of places when they want to do like data digital transformation or implement a new software, and sometimes enablement is a missing piece. So that's what we wanted to bring the attention on that. And today it's a great honor that we will be receiving Ant Alford. Ant is a group head of data service at Cognita School. I will let him introduce himself a little deeper, but to get you started, Ant, maybe you recently joined Cognita School, but we know that you have a considerable experience in data and analytics. And by the way, I have seen Ant spoke at the Tableau Summit. I think it was some months ago, and I found that what he said about data enablement and literacy was very interesting. So that's why I'm very happy that he come and spoke with us. And like you recently joined this new role, but can you tell us a little bit more about your prior experience and how it translates and help you into this new role?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you for inviting me and for having me today. It's a pleasure to talk to everyone. My name's Ant. I've spent the last 15 or so years in data and analytics, and that's been across a range of industries really. So actually started off doing a placement year at my university for an old steel organization based in the north of England, which was pretty grim to be honest. But my first real job was working as a category analyst for a large retailer. I've then worked in an insight agency. I've worked for a tech startup that did smartphone and wearable technology. I then spent 6 years at a company called Immediate Media. And yeah, I've recently moved to an organization called Cognita as their new head of data. As a group role, Cognita own over 100 private schools across the world. And they've got locations in Latin America, in the US and Europe. There's a large presence in the Middle East and then in Asia. So yeah, that role, I'm leading a global function that covers data platforming, engineering, data governance, analytics, AI and machine learning. And we support these 100 schools and 20,000 employees with trusted data and insight. So yeah, my route to this is, as I said, is always had a data and analytics thread, but I probably maybe slightly opposite to people who end up managing teams. I started more business facing, and a lot of what I was doing in my formative years was kind of account management, but with data and analytics as a side. So when I worked for an agency, I was there for 4 years. At one point, I had 150 different clients, and I would travel around the UK presenting to them data and insight. So quite early on in my 20s, I learned to be able to communicate and build narratives and stories with data and present those in front of CEOs that were managing really large FMCG companies. So I think that gave me good steed into being able to translate what we do in the technical side of things and bridge that with the business needs. And then as I progressed, I actually got closer to the technical side of things. And when I was at Immediate, our our team ended up being a multidiscipline team. We introduced analytics engineering. We deployed the first machine learning models. As I left, we were doing a lot of stuff around vectorization and AI models. So yeah, I kind of grew to really enjoy that side of things. And it's, something that as a leader, I probably shouldn't be in the weeds as much, but I love that and continue trying to learn new skills and new techniques. But yeah, I think having the business at the beginning of my career gave me the good balance of trying to understand that everything you do has to be attached to a business outcome. Otherwise, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's, redundant effort.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I'm curious, Annabelle, yeah, I know Ant's path seems a little different, right? That's really interesting. Sometimes you can be a business user, you do a little data on the side, and all of a sudden everyone's just like, oh yeah, Ant's the guy who can do the data stuff, and it becomes your unofficial and then official responsibility to manage those things. I'm curious how that contrasts with your experience. Did you start, and we might have talked about this on prior webinars, but for people who might be hearing of you for the first time, did you start in a more technical role? I'm doing technical things and then expanded out into the people side, or kind of like Ant, did you start business side and then adopted some of the technical things, or is it something totally different?
Oof. So I had a master degree in finance risk management. So I studied like statistical, advanced statistic. At my time, machine learning didn't exist. And I start working more on the financial market.
Mm,
And then I work in a bank as a relationship manager. I was given like a responsibility, yeah, a team very
hmm.
quickly. So I have been managing team like since I am 23 years old.
Wow.
That was very complicated, and sometimes people that were double my age.
Mm,
Um, and then I had this technical experience a little bit later, but still, like when I work at the Bank de France, the French Central Bank, I had teams to manage and also like
mm,
technical skill to learn. I had to learn SAS and a lot of different skills. So yeah, it will be like building both skills together.
hmm. Hmm. Yeah. You feel like that's consistent with your experience now at Cognito, where you're, yeah, responsible for managing a team, but there is responsibility for you as well to pitch in and do some of the work.
Yeah, I think I mean where it differs from previous roles and is actually, probably more what I want to focus on in the future is I'm I guess I'm taking my technical understanding and translating that into more strategic architectural plans. So where we're actually at the beginning of a big digital and data transformation at Cognita. That was one of the main
Mhm.
reasons why I joined the organization. So yeah, it's given me a lot of opportunity to really think about what is the ideal future state architecture, um, which is going to support the business in becoming more data centric and positioning data as a strategic asset, and
Hmm.
also then helping the business make more data-driven decisions and reaching our goals. So yeah, it's I'm not I actually haven't touched any code in 4 months, which is a bit
Feels
different
weird, right?
because yeah, I was on the side and maybe spending a bit too much time fiddling around with data products and some machine learning models and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, I miss it, but I think I'm flexing a different muscle now, which is also quite nice.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if I can ask, do you already have a plan what you want to do, like for 1 year, 2 years?
We're
Is
we're
it still
forming
in
one.
progress?
Yes, yeah. I think when I joined, I was pretty dogmatic in having a 3 month plan, and a lot of that was really just spending time understanding the business. It's pretty complicated business because each regional team has almost its own organizational structure, its own market complexities. I've coming into the education sector completely cold, so I'm used to selling advertising space and magazines on how to grow tomatoes and those sorts of things. So it's a slightly different product. And some of our schools are, they're very expensive. They're very, very good schools. So you're coming from a very kind of mass user base but low value product to a slightly smaller user base but an extremely valuable product. So that's taken a little bit of getting used to. But yeah, it's been good just having the headspace and the time to really understand the business, understand where the capability gaps are, what the opportunities are, and then translating that into some organizational structural plans, some operating model plans, reviewing our technology architecture, thinking about what's got us to where we are now, where do we want to go in the future, and making sure that we're building for the future. Because yeah, the data maturity at Cognita is growing. But if we were to have the shiniest new platform delivered tomorrow, we wouldn't be utilizing it just yet. But we need to be cognizant that in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we do want to have that capability in place. So it's kind of preempting what we might need in the future.
That's great. We got a question here. Let's see if I can. It says, it's from Stephen, and it says, I find that most slash all data catalogs are not aware of user permissions provisioned in databases and cannot sort present data products the user is authorized to see versus not see. How have you advertised data products to analysts when each group may have an entirely different authorization to data?
Wow, going straight in at the deep end there.
Yes.
Um, I'll probably have to bring it up a couple of levels because that might be like
Uh-huh.
slightly outside of what I can extract out my mind at 4:30 on an
No, that's
afternoon.
all
But
right. Yeah.
yeah, I think yeah, cataloging and data products and the overall data governance piece is usually a second thought, and is really fundamental if you want to have proper data democratization. So where I've done this in the past, but probably not as sophisticated as the question indicates, is just making sure that firstly you've got good lines of communication and you're using the right channels to at least put out there what's available, whether it's catalogued formally or not. So I've had great success with things like data community of practices where we're sharing
Hmm.
what we've got in our repositories and what we've got in our Tableau servers and those sorts of things. We um we we consistently used to review what we had in our catalogs, and we went through a really large exercise which we labeled "cut the crap," where we just deleted down loads of stuff that
Hmm.
hadn't been used before and actually unlocked loads of space and some optimized savings in our data warehouse, which was really good. But yeah, I think it's just about being really clear on what is available. If you can make a catalog and keep lists of things, then that's great. If you can automate that properly, then even better. Things like Microsoft Purview is really good for data cataloging. In Databricks, you've obviously got Unity catalog, so there's lots of out the box tooling that you can utilize if you're mature enough to use that. But
Hmm.
if you're not, just keeping a log of what's actually in your repos and what's in your servers and what's being used, I think it's a good starting point to then make the decision as to how to either get more engagement with those. Is it a training problem? Do people just not understand how to navigate to where they are? And that's always a good starting point to understand how you can drive the adoption.
Hmm.
Not sure if that was actually answering the question or not, but
I think it's important. I think that's a good
Um,
fundamental answer to back it up as well and kind of view governance a little more holistically. And I would imagine as you kind of get to the specifics, then you can kind of parse those apart. And um, those are going to vary from practice to practice, depending on what tools you use and how you're set up and what kind of industry you're in and what types of users you're serving. Um, Another question here, real quick, and I think this question kind of dovetails with a question that we had as well, kind of in our initial conversations. But they're asking, can you define what is a data product with some examples? And the question that we would ask as well, we talked a lot about data as a product operational model. So maybe those two things dovetail a little bit. But yeah, how would you define a data product? I know that's kind of like that's probably a very broad question that can vary as well as you kind of get more granular. But what is that? And then how have those data as a product operational models worked out for you all?
Yeah, interesting. Again, like my answer might probably not be what the question's looking for. I think the data as a product piece is more about mindset than actually what is a product and what isn't. Because really, I think anything that the team produces can be classed as a product. So
Mm,
it could be a semantic model, it could be a data pipeline, it could be a dashboard, it might be a machine learning model, it might actually be the data platform in its entirety. You know, any of that stuff could be the product that the team's accountable for. I think where it becomes an important model to implement into the business is when you want to try and shift away from being a ticket repository that just delivers stuff to the
mm,
business, and where you're kind of firstly forcing the team to take a bit more ownership of what they're actually producing and managing the life cycle of what they produce like you would a product in a business. So really making sure that the owners of those products, the team that puts them together, are continuously looking to understand how they're being utilized, get feedback from their stakeholders, working through how to iterate them and increase their value to the business and just produce higher quality work. So it's not necessarily this is a product and this isn't a product. You know, if you wanted to get into semantics, you can just define that in your own way. But as I said, I think it's more about the mind shift of owning that, and being accountable for its performance and its value to the business. So that's one part. The second part is also how you interact with the business and how you engage with the business users. And I think how this really starts to work and sing is where there's clarity between what tech deliver and what the business use, but then there's also a quite strong collaborative relationship by, we've delivered this product, it's for you, you're using the product, you're the owner of that product. How can we work together to make sure that we are continuously improving what the whole point is in the first place? So yeah, if you can get that mindset, that data as a product mindset to permeate outside of just tech and into the business,
mm,
then you get into a really powerful position where everyone is viewing the data products as important strategic products,
mm.
and therefore they're given enough airtime to actually improve and utilize and elevate. So yeah, that's it's less about this is product A, this is product B, and I think it's more
Hmm.
about that mindset approach.
Cool. We have a question from Angela, and I think that is going along this way too. When scaling your data team, how did you handle the tension between centralizing data expertise and empowering business unit to make their own data decision? What trade-off did you encounter?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. I think again, it depends on the maturity of the organization. The last two roles I've had, we were kind of coming in cold, not starting from scratch, but the data maturity were relatively low. And I think when you're in that situation, the the best foot forward is a centralized model, because you need to be able to build the expertise and the capabilities with a fair amount of control and governance over what you want to create. Think of, I think the terms like a data fabric, basically, where you've got the centralized team owning and governing the platform, thinking about how all of it hangs together, the the CI/CD that you're going to use, the way it's meant to be utilized with the business. You have to define those policies and standards and best practices first and foremost. As the maturity scales, then you can start thinking about a broader adoption methodology. So whether that is kind of a full data mesh approach or a kind of harmonized bit in between, where there are obvious use cases to enable those localized teams, domains, regions to have access and almost curate their own data products, then you don't want to block that. You want to scale the democratization of data usage in the business. So you want to really enable that, but you have to be super cognizant that that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of well curated governance over how everything's used, and there's a big kind of training piece, a big enablement piece that goes alongside that. So where we've had success in the past is very specific use cases. So have small pilots. In my previous role, there were a few different data teams dotted around the business, and one of them was definitely growing in their competencies and their expertise, and they were asking for more stuff which we just couldn't deliver because we had a massive backlog and we ended up being a bottleneck to them. So we had to move into more of a federated approach where we gave them access to a certain point to be able to build their own ingestion pipelines, curate their own data models, build their own Tableau dashboards. But because we defined all of the governance and the CI/CD pipelines and processes and all of the rituals centrally first and foremost, you can bring them into your world, make sure that they've got the right environments, nothing's kind of promoted to production without the right sign-offs and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's definitely the utopian goal is to have everyone accessing data everywhere. I remember my old CEO actually used to say, can't you just train everyone in SQL? And I was like, well, yeah, you could, but do you then want to give hundreds, thousands of people access to the data warehouse? And, there's loads of
Hmm.
really bad stuff that would come with that. But, that's the goal, is basically being able to give everyone access to everything they need, but you need to do it in a controlled and quite pragmatic approach, I think.
Yeah, that's a really smart answer. I think a lot of times people kind of get, I don't want to say trapped, but you pick a side. You pick centralized versus, federated, and people are like, well, this works and sometimes this works, and people have strong opinions about it because both can work. But I kind of like that attitude of having some dynamism, having some flexibility in terms of, okay, well, yeah, what works? If one group is reaching a high is getting higher on the maturity curve, whereas others aren't, treating them accordingly and being flexible in that way so that you are not a bottleneck and causing frustrations. I think that's really intelligent versus, just planting your flag and saying we're centralized by God, like
Yeah.
no, uh, I don't care if you want to do more. So that I think that's a really interesting answer, and I don't know that I've heard quite that shade of nuance in terms of which direction to go. So yeah, that's great stuff.
We have, you mentioned your team, and how do you empower them to learn and continue to grow?
Yeah, I think, well, this is really important to me and my own growth and development. I'm really passionate about this. And I think firstly, it helps to try and promote a growth mindset. So I remember having some leadership training a few years ago, and we had some third-party consultants come in and talk about growth mindset, and I'd never heard of it before. And I had a bit of a eureka moment where I realized I thought I was potentially growth mindset, and I actually wasn't. And when you realize you don't have to see and think of problems in the same way anymore, it becomes really liberating because everything is growth and a learning opportunity. So I think it's really important to try and model those sorts of behaviors when you're coming in to lead a team. So that's that's one priority thing to do. And then I think there's just lots of different multiple approaches to empowering teams to learn. We've in the past had really basic things like every Friday once a month, we would just shut down our emails and have a dev day, and we would
Mm,
get people learning stuff. And it doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to their job, but having that sense of freedom to learn and experiment was actually really valuable. And a lot of the proof of concepts that people were putting together in their dev days, we actually ended up scaling and putting into production. So yeah, I think just making people feel like they have the permission to spend time on learning and development is really important. And then if you wanted to be more sophisticated with it, you can think about more structured training programs. In the UK, we're quite lucky. There's something called the apprenticeship scheme, where if your company has a certain employee levy, you pay into a fund, and then you can access that fund for training programs. And data is one of the kind of
mm,
bedrocks of those programs in the UK. So I've had maybe 4 or 5 of my team do data apprenticeship programs, and they spanned from 12-month programs on introduction to SQL and Python and some visualization, to actually you can end up doing a master's in them. So yeah, I think trying to understand what someone wants to do with their career, and lean into their strengths more as opposed to their weaknesses, and trying to, shine a light on those opportunities is how you then grow someone's confidence in wanting
mm,
to continue to learn and train and develop. And when you've got that environment and that culture in your team, then it becomes really powerful, because everyone's constantly just bouncing off each other, and we're all testing and failing and learning at the same time. So yeah, those are some of the kind of techniques that I've used in the past.
I really love what you said about like really like trying to focus on their strengths and not weaknesses. I think it's very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah,
mhm,
because everyone's got learning and development opportunities, and if you're underperforming in those certain areas, then obviously you need to action those. But just generally, if someone has a deep interest in something and is going to go above and beyond to expedite their skill set in that interest, then why wouldn't you want to shine a light on that? I remember I hired a data analyst in my old company who quite quickly showed that he was really, really competent with the technical side of things. We then moved him into an analytics engineering role. We kind of branched that out into some machine learning. He was one of the first people in our business to deploy a propensity to churn model. And that just kind of grew out of his constant desire to continue learning and developing. So I think when you've got someone that has a growth mindset like that, um, they're a Ferrari, and you're going to want to let them just have as much road as possible to see how fast they can go. So you need to enable that as opposed to hinder it and call out where they're underperforming, or they're not doing too well in certain things. There's a time and a place for that, but I think shining a light on the positives is critical.
mhm. Curious, there's a question in here from Vamshi, and it has to do with enablement. It has to do with kind of this growth. But how do you measure success? Whether you have a center of excellence, or whether it's more not as defined, and it's just measuring the growth of individual users and how they're developing. But how do you report back on that enablement growth for their personal journeys? And then also, how do you measure growth of the overall health of analytics and data? Kind of those two things, like how you're serving the business and how the people you manage are growing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that people in our world always struggle to communicate and articulate well. It's quite hard when you're essentially a service provider to really follow through to the end of a project, to understand what it delivered and the
Mm,
potential ROI. So I usually split this into two categories. There's firstly one that's very easy to manage and report on, and that's kind of adoption. So how many people are using the reports? How many people are accessing the models? How many active users do you have? What's the stickiness? All of those kind of typical web analytics metrics you can apply to your Tableau dashboards, Power BI dashboards, etc. So that's quite easy to do. The impact is slightly harder, and again, there's kind of two parts to this. What I've focused on first and foremost is the thing that again you can control and own a little bit more. And we started logging our tickets more formally. We weren't really doing this when I first joined. And at the same time, we launched quite a large data literacy program across the business. And what we started to notice was where the usage of some of these programs and different bits of course material were being used across the business increased. In some areas, our BAU issues, kind of generic tickets, started to die down a little bit. We then doubled down on some of our super users and we created a data champions learning program where we were given, I think it was about 20 people in the business, access to the data warehouse. We gave them training in SQL. We gave them some basic Tableau dashboarding training. And then we specifically looked at the volume of requests that would have typically come from them and how that changed over time. And that was then quite easy to work out. Okay, so over the course of a year, we've actually saved about 25 or 30% of this one person's resource because their time's not spent on these generic BAU items anymore, which we could have, we could have just said, okay, that was X thousands of pounds a year. So that's a number that the CEOs are going to want to understand. But then what was really good is we then said, okay, so instead of just doing nothing, we actually spent that time doing some added value work, and that's where this individual was the one that then built the propensity modeling, which then has a real business outcome because then we could turn around and say, okay, if we reduced churn by 10%, then that's going to save us £5 million a year. So you kind of have a two-pronged approach there. It's the optimized resourcing time that you might have saved and then redeployed somewhere else. But then if it's attached to a business outcome, then that's even better. So kind of following that, we moved to a bit of more of a lean canvas approach to generating our requests intake, and we would always try and get the stakeholders to specify what were the KPIs that they thought this initiative were going to drive and what was the perceived ROI. And then if you've got this product mindset, you stay very close to the product owner, the business owner of the product that you're defining. And you can then understand from them, how much has this saved you time? Did this actually drive an increase in conversion or a reduction in churn or whatever it is? And you keep a finger on the pulse of the actual impact that what you produced had.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I really like kind of that again, having that open line of communication with the data product owners and as well as the business owners, the people who it's directly affecting. That way, you're not having to grasp at straws of trying to figure out, okay, well, what metrics are they going to care about? Well, they're going to tell you because they're kind of to a degree in the trenches with you in terms of managing this product and rolling it out. And they will be able to tell you, again, that ROI thing versus you having to guess at it. And I really enjoy it too, because a lot of what you're saying here ties back to that original kind of poll question we had at the beginning, which a good part of identifying any goal is identifying from the outset how you're going to measure it, right? What are the metrics or what are the things that your stakeholders are going to be looking for that you're going to report on? Because you see this all the time. I see this in marketing where, we can gather a bajillion stats. I can have an email marketing campaign with open rate, with unsubscribe rate, with a click-through rate. But if leadership doesn't care about open rate or click-through rate, but I'm like, oh, this is important, it's not gonna, regardless of whether there is real ROI happening, it's not going to be perceived, and therefore it's not going to be as successful because you don't have that buy-in. But I think that's really, really great stuff to kind of have that collaboration close. That way, you're doing less fishing for how are we succeeding, and it's more real time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the data maturity scales in the business, and you'd expect the volume of requests to increase, it's then also quite a good way of fielding off not doing the work, because if it's not tied to a business outcome and a
Hmm.
perceived ROI value, then you're not going to do it, because there's only a limited amount of capacity and resource, and you need to direct that to where the biggest bang for your buck is. So, you can
Hmm.
also use it as a quite a good way to field off not doing not doing work and focusing on the things that matter.
Hmm. We have two questions left, but I kind of want to shift gears a little bit because I know we had talked a fair bit about AI and its potential now, in this moment in time to maybe accelerate some enablement efforts or at least to accelerate some of those data products or whatever it may be. But I'm curious how you have seen AI accelerating progress kind of in your current role and as well as maybe some things that you're looking that can potentially accelerate. What is that role playing for you right now in terms of AI hype versus well, this is actually delivering or will deliver real value?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, to be honest. I think it's definitely created more of an experimentation mindset in a lot of organizations, which probably was missing from before. And I think a lot of people have got to the point where you need to get on the bus,
Mm,
regardless of whether you actually understand it or want it to happen. So I think that's been a good thing to just accelerate people's understanding and appreciation of experimentation.
mhm,
Um, some of the projects that I've been involved in with AI have been great learning exercises. When I left the media, we were quite close to being able to create a vector search that we could actually deploy onto our websites, and that would be a much more sophisticated product for users to search recipes or how-to
mhm,
guides or whatever it was. So um, yeah, I mean, in terms of the acceleration of all of that, I think it kind of goes back to the experimentation mindset and
mhm,
making sure that you're having firstly that growth mindset, and you're carving out the space for people to play around with these things and think of some ideas. You can have loads of bottom up ideas as well as the strategic top down, and then if you can be a bit more formalized in your approach with this. So where I've in my previous role where I am now, we have quite clear stage gates for projects. So if something's going to require a certain level of budget, then you need to have a bit of a business case together.
mhm,
You can then work through a proof of concept that can then potentially move to a prototype, to an MVP. Um, so you're making sure that you're constantly testing and learning and iterating at each of those stages. So you've
mhm,
still got the experimentation in your mind. The goal is to hopefully deliver something of value. But I think there was an MIT study recently that referenced something like 95% of AI pilots don't deliver
mhm,
measurable ROI, which I guess is, I probably slightly disagree, because it's still valuable
mhm,
learning. If something
mhm,
doesn't work, then at least that doesn't work. Um, and where we've had quite good success accelerating the development of things is just leveraging what's already out there. So there's a lot of frameworks that you can implement. Project we're currently working on at the minute is building a proprietary AI assistant tool, so our back office staff can have access to a GPT tool, where they can securely upload proprietary
mhm,
information and all that sensitive documentation, etc. And we've harnessed a lot of the templating and the
mhm,
scaffolding that you can get from OpenAI and those
mhm,
sorts of places. So yeah, I think utilize what's available, don't reinvent the wheel. I read recently that Databricks have just partnered with OpenAI as well. So
mhm,
quite soon you're going to have access to all of the OpenAI models within Databricks, and they've got a
mhm.
lot of out the box ways to productionize Databricks apps. So yeah, I think it's a combination of having that experimentation mindset, making sure that if you are going to invest the time and the resource and money, then you're quite clear on those definitions of done and what those
Mhm.
use cases are, so you don't just bleed and hemorrhage resource and
Yeah.
effort. and then to accelerate the learning, utilize the frameworks and platforms that are already out there and existing. And if you can just plug and play and do something straight away, then great. If it then looks like it might work and it needs to be maybe redesigned and re-architected for productionization, then you can do that, but you've not wasted time building something gold plated, which
Hmm.
is not going to fit. It's not going to get there in the first place.
Yeah, I like that perspective on experimentation as well, using AI, less kind of managing your expectations with it, but also understanding that if, an AI use case or an AI, a POC doesn't work out, well, what did you learn from it? Because a lot of times, whether it's a dashboard or whether it's AI, one thing a lot of people learn is you do it, you get a bad result, and you're like, why did that happen? Well, the underlying data probably was not clean or probably not
Yeah,
in an order that it needed to be in. And so you can go back and manage those data pipelines, do some data or analytics engineering. And that is a valuable effort because it uncovered maybe not the insight you were looking for, but it uncovered a valuable insight, which is your data needs some work before
yeah,
you can start building off of it. So that's useful, right?
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, completely agree.
Let's see here. I'm curious. You had mentioned AI. Speaking of this and speaking of dashboards, have you found, whether it's in your prior role or current role, that whether it's agentic AI, whether it's just its ability to kind of connect people to answers via like natural language search or whatever it may be, have you noticed that the need for dashboards is less because people can find those answers quicker? Or is that kind of more of, well, that's the promise of it. The reality might not be there yet. What's that relationship like? Because obviously within Tableau circles, within a lot of circles, agentic AI is kind of the big buzzword, and that's
Yeah.
again, that's the hype. But what's the reality on the ground, have you found?
Yeah, I think the North Star is that. Um, I would say in my experience though, we're way off being there quite yet.
Hmm.
I had said in previous talks, dashboard is dead. It's not, not right now anyway. I think there's a bit of a shift in trying to bring the intelligence into the flow of work. So I think like early examples of that were Tableau integrations with Slack. There was a recent one with Teams where you can put charts and data in front of people in their usual flow of
Hmm.
work ways of working. I think Tableau Pulse was probably the first trial of them trying to have some kind of generative insights delivered through the platform. I don't, for me and for the business I was in at the time, it wasn't adopted very well. I think it was pretty limited in functionality. I think the the effort was there, but it just wasn't
Hmm.
executed properly. And I know that even though we've not used it yet, Power BI then has things like Copilot analytics, and that looks quite good from some of the examples that I've seen. But Copilot licenses are pretty expensive as well. So
Hmm.
I think that's the direction of travel. We've as part of this AI tool that we're looking to experiment with, my end goal is to have that connected to our data warehouse and our semantic layers, and it
Hmm.
can be a one-stop shop for someone to query how many days holiday they might have left, but then also what was our enrollment conversion last month and how much EBITDA did we generate last quarter. It can be a one-stop shop for all of that. There'll still be, I think, a place for visualization,
Hmm.
because that helps tells the story of data. And if you want to tell good narratives, you need to have nice, pretty pictures to help you do that. But yeah, I think a lot of the innovation I see in the industry is definitely leaning into that more agentic
Hmm.
space. And I've mentioned Databricks a couple of times already, but something that they've recently launched was their Databricks One was almost like a pane of glass that sits on top of a lot of capability unified, which is more for the business facing users. And within that, you do get access to some of their out the box dashboarding. There's the Databricks Genie, which is their kind of generative AI chatbot. So
Hmm.
again, I've not actually used it. On paper, it sounds like a really good step forward. But as you mentioned earlier, you need the good data going in.
Hmm.
If you don't have that, then all of this stuff fails and is a bit pointless. So,
Hmm.
I always think don't just chase the shiny toys. You need to have your foundations absolutely watertight. If you've got really good data quality and data governance,
Hmm.
then you can build these cool, shiny, and probably super valuable products on top of that. But if you're going to just chase the latest tech and everything else is a big spaghetti mess at the beginning point, then it's completely pointless.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think that we are still not ready. I think a lot of CEO and CFO will not want like to ask questions. They want to have already the information when they just switch on their phone on their computer. That's
Hmm.
what they want. Of course, you can customize, you can use AI to maybe summarize them, but they want to see the data often.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the newest generation will do it differently, but we still have some years, I think.
I mean, you firstly got to get them from just knee jerk asking the data analyst, which is probably what they'll still do when we've got all these shiny agentic tools. They're still going to ask that one person they trust to give them the right data. So, that's the first nut we need to crack, really.
Yeah. Hard to change human nature.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them would like to have them printed.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
can you print it, this dashboard? Yes.
Yeah. Think of the trees.
That's the
This is,
ugly.
oh, go ahead, Annabelle. What were you saying?
No, I was just saying that that's the ugly truth.
I know. Truly, though, truly. Yep. There will always be that. We're kind of at 5 minutes. So I kind of want to get these last two questions out. And this first one from Peter is relevant or adjacent to what we're talking about. Um, he is asking, have you had to take on the seemingly impossible task, yes, of mapping out tech stacks in a legacy organization or government entity that has grown its tech over decades, and there's large unknown across product lines meeting all of the business needs, which by design were siloed for governance. So has that been your experience where you've had legacy systems, or legacy processes, frameworks that you have either had to work in or slowly change, or has your experience been more, well, we're just rebooting from the ground up and it's whatever tool stack you prefer as, group head of data or whatever it may be?
A bit of both, really. Much earlier in my career, we when I worked for the tech company, there was no automated Power BI reporting. There was no SQL. Everything was done on Excel. So yeah, I've had experience of trying to work through the legacy systems of where all of those spread marks come from and migrating those into something which was slightly more sophisticated and automated. Thankfully, when I was at Immediate Media, the kind of data warehouse build had been going for a few years prior to me joining, so we were already in quite a good situation there, and the data volume was significant. We were processing ad click data, and that was millions of rows a day.
Hmm.
But the actual number of sources was pretty small, so we had quite clear governance over the structure of all of that. So with that baseline, we could just build on top using, more sophisticated tooling. Where I am now is slightly different, where each school might have its own system, and the business I'm in buys schools. So every time we buy a school, we either need to kind of onboard their systems onto our new systems or try and integrate into their legacy system. So, I mean, it's one of the most complicated, fragmented systems architecture I've ever been a part of, and
Hmm.
it's a real problem. So the data quality and the data governance is pretty significant, but we're making steps forward to define what the right processes are, the right ways of working, define what our blueprints are, and if we're going to create single customer views and golden records, then we need to be really clear on our expectations of the data owners, the data custodians in the business to help us push there. And I think, as I said earlier, the data transformation generally across all businesses is cultural and business transformation at the same
Hmm.
time. So it's so important to have the buy-in from your leadership team and the alignment with the strategy, because otherwise what you do is going to fail. So if you are going to try and move to legacy systems, firstly, what's the point? What's the business value of doing that? Because if there isn't any, it's going to be wasted effort and redundant effort. So yeah, I think working out exactly how the architecture is going to support the business goals in the first place is the starting point before you even think about migrating to anything new.
Mm-hmm.
And to just jump into this, how to convince people, we have another question from the audience, and I think that is quite interesting, is even if you have like the buying from your superior and the stakeholder, but you have people who will block this idea because maybe they are afraid or they don't want to go to this change. How to manage to convince them and to drive them to change their mind?
It's pretty common, to be honest, and I think I said it earlier. It's all about teasing out the quick wins and those priority use cases, because if you've got someone knocking on your door, then work with them, because generally in our roles we're knocking on people's doors. So if someone wants to let you in and they're knocking on your door, utilize that. So work with them, understand exactly what capability you can help them build, what business outcome your output can feed into, and use that as a test case and get a use case. And if you can demonstrate the value there, then other business leaders are going to start recognizing, oh, okay, these guys actually can help me deliver what I want. So you really need to understand what it is that the outcome is. What is that? So what? Don't boil the ocean. Start small and build start the embers small and then build that fire. And you need to take people on a journey, and generally those detractors are only going to jump on your ship when they really see what's in it for them. And if you can go to a commercial director and tell him that you can make him 10 million more pounds if he gives you X, Y, and Z information and supports you building a product for him, then he's going to buy into that. So yeah, I think there's a big stakeholder management piece, but it's also being able to demonstrate value in those early kind of quick win use cases that then help spread the word and gets everyone on board.
I love that analogy. I would say too, leading into that, if you want to work with someone who's knocking on your door, never underestimate the power of friendly competition. When someone knocks on your door and they kind of not necessarily inadvertently become a champion, and then all of a sudden their peers want that same level of success, that sort of thing can be contagious and a really, really, really good inroads versus trying to like, I'm going to communicate to all of them and do all of them at the same time. Starting with that person who's excited and eager and interested, and all of a sudden someone else from another department or their peer is going to be like, "Hey, can you do that for me too?" You know,
Yeah.
which is really valuable. Okay, one more question. I know we're just like a minute over time here, but if you have a minute or two, Ant, to answer this last one, I
Sure.
think
Yeah, of
it's
course.
it's right in line with what we're talking about. And you may have answered it partially already, but this is a follow-up question from Angela, and she asks, "Can you share an example of a time when unclear data role definitions caused challenges in a transformation project and how you resolved it?" She's asking, what process do you use to clearly define boundaries between roles like data engineer, data analyst, data architect during major transformation
Mm.
projects?
Yeah. I mean, again, it kind of does go back to the maturity. And I'd say that when I first joined media and we were growing the analytics department, and then that kind of ended up including the data engineering team, we got into a bit of a way of working and a culture where the lines blurred a little bit, and the handshake and trade-off between engineering and analytics wasn't that clear, and it started causing some issues. So the quality of code sometimes wasn't as good, pipelines were failing. We were, as analysts, building our own ingestion pipelines that weren't conforming to the engineering standards, and whose responsibility then is it to manage and govern all of that? So we got to a point where the scale and sophistication of what we were doing needed clearer definitions of
Mhm.
roles and responsibilities. And that's what led me to create the analytics engineering part of the team. Um, and we were really prescriptive in what does the engineer do? When does their job end? What does the analytics engineer do? When does their job end? And then what does the data analyst do? And there
Mhm.
is going to be some kind of bleeding of lines, and there is obviously a handshake, and that kind of can happen at different parts of the life cycle. But yeah, I think it's really important to almost have the freedom and flexibility to grow to the point where you're starting to actually maybe accumulate too much tech debt, or you're running into ways of working issues or coding issues or whatever it is. Then that's the time to actually take a step back, review what you've done and what you've got going on, reassess what it is that you think the business needs in the future. As I said,
Mhm.
tie it to the business strategy, to those outcomes. We knew that we wanted to move into the AI space. As I mentioned, we were building this vector search tool. So the data that we had going in needs to be absolutely gold plated. So in order to do that, we needed roles that specifically looked at the data modeling, and those roles were analytics engineers, and they needed tools like DBT, and we needed proper data models, and we
Mhm.
needed a proper CI/CD process to sign everything off. So we changed a lot of that. We changed people's roles. We had new jobs, we had new tooling, but it was all to enable us to move into that space that we knew we needed to move to. So our outputs supported the business outcome.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know at the outset, right? You start a project, you have your goals, you have your team in place, and then you start getting into the work, and you're like, oh yeah, maybe we need a little more guidelines to reassess and to move forward successfully. So,
Yeah.
well, very cool. I will share our last little slide. I'm curious, is there a way, Ant preferred if people were to reach out to you if they had questions, what's your preferred mode of contact?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to continue talking, then you can get me on LinkedIn. I've yeah, quite active on that. So that's all good. And yeah, big thanks from me to having me on. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. So appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. Likewise, our challenge, as is every webinar, is not enough time, and we really thank you for your time, for your insightful conversation. Lots of good gems in here, so thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.